Hi everyone. Today we're going to jump into circles. We are going to be talking about circles for the next 2 weeks, give or take. And so I just wanted to review some vocab and make sure we're all good before we really get into the geometry part of the circles. So this is just a quick review of your parts. So up here in the thought bubble, if you look, it says the word, circle, comes from the Latin word circulus, which means disc. Okay, so a circle does have a disc-like shape to it. If you want to think of a real-world example, maybe a frisbee. And sometimes they actually do call them discs, frisbee discs. So we are going to jump down. We're not going to do all of these. We're going to jump down and start out with the definitions. So, a line segment that passes through the center and has endpoints on, it says the circumference, okay, and the circumference is actually just the distance around the outside of your circle, okay, the outside part of your circle. But the segment that goes through your center and has endpoints on the circle, okay, again, they're calling it the circumference, is your diameter. So come up here and look at your picture. Two things. Notice they have circumference. Okay, when they're talking about the circumference, they're talking about the distance around the outside of your circle. And your diameter would be right here. Now, I have a minor problem with where they put the word diameter. Make sure that you guys know that this word diameter goes from this side of my circle all the way to this side. Okay, not just that little piece of a segment. Make sure you're good with that, because that can be a slightly misleading. All right, the second vocab word we're going to look at. It's a line segment that has one endpoint at the center and the other on, again, they say circumference, I say circle. Same thing. Okay, so it goes from the center to your circle. That is your radius. And again, if you come up and look at your picture, they did a good job with this label. I'm just going to do a different color. But this, from your circle to the center, is your radius. Okay, and of course, you can have more than one radii. That's plural for radius. You could have an infinite number of them, actually. Same thing with diameters. Okay. As long as it goes through the center, side to side, that's a diameter. And if it goes from the center to your circle, that's a radius. All right, next vocab word. A line segment that has both endpoints on the circumference. And again, if it bothers you that they're using that word, because that's not usually what we would call it. We would say on the circle. You can make a note to yourself. Now, this is a segment. It sounds very similar to a diameter. The difference is it does not have to go through the center. Okay. The word for that is chord. And so again, if we come back up to our picture, okay, they did a good job labeling this. It's a line segment. Okay, it has endpoints on your circle. It doesn't necessarily, it's not going through the center. It doesn't have to. Okay, it's called a chord. Next definition. A line segment that touches only one point on the circumference on your circle. Excuse me. Remember, that is called a tangent. It only touches your circle once. So there's a good example of it. So we'll pick a different color. Sorry, I like colors. It's only touching your circle in one point. And that would be a tangent. Okay, and it does say a line segment. It also can be a line. If you notice, they had arrows on that, so it doesn't really matter. All right, the next part, the portion of the circumference. Okay, a part or a portion of the, again, you could say circle. That is called an arc, and that's what we're going to spend today really talking about. But to give you an example, okay, if it's part of your circumference or circle, they have this piece labeled. Okay, that's an arc, A-R-C. You have lots of arcs. Okay, that's obviously not the only one. This would be part of your circle. Okay, that would be considered an arc. This little piece would be an arc. So again, just like all of the other words, you can have more than one. All right, so we're not going to do this definition. It is not something we ever work with. Okay, and I very rarely see it, so we're going to skip that one. All right, next definition. A portion defined by 2 radii and an arc. So it's part of your circle, okay, and it's made by 2 radii. There's radii. That's plural for radius. We don't say radiuses. And an arc. So what would that look like on your picture? And this is not labeled. Oh, let's write that first. Sorry. That's a sector, and we're going to spend more time on that later in the week or possibly next week. So a sector, and again, more than one, but 2 radii, so here's one radius, here's another radius. Okay. But this whole piece, it's like a piece of your pie. This whole piece right here would be considered a sector. And like I said, we are going to do more with that. We have a formula that will let you find just the area of that piece. So just think of it as a piece of pie from your circle. And again, you can have many different sectors. And last but not least, okay, it actually is another segment or line. A line that intersects the circumference at 2 points. So it's a line that intersects your circle at 2 different points. The only difference between like a chord and this is that they make it look like a line. Okay, and that is called a secant. And they do a good job right here of showing you what a secant looks like. You'll notice really the only difference between your chord and or your diameter and your secant is that your secant keeps going. It's a line, so it actually comes outside the circle too. Your chord is just a segment, your diameter is just a segment, but that secant keeps going. Okay, and the only difference in a picture is arrows. So those are the vocabs I wanted to look at. Now let me change colors because it's a really ugly brown. This to-do list, okay, we're not going to pay any attention to that. It's really not that important. Same thing, circumference and area formulas, we're not really going to worry too much about. They're on your formula sheet if you need it. We're not going to be finding the circumference and area. We are going to find what they call arc length and area of sector, but we'll talk about that later. One thing I do want to point out, your diameter, D, right here. Okay, remember, your diameter is equal to 2 times your radius. Or some people say radius plus radius, because that may pop up. In other words, if your diameter, if this whole line here is 20, then you know that your radius, that's from the center to one side, is half of that, so you'd have 10 and 10. If you know your diameter is 50, then your radius is 25. Okay, divided by 2. If you know the radius, you also know the diameter. So in other words, if they tell you your radius is 8, then your diameter is 2 times 8, or 8 plus 8, which is 16. Okay. So, those are just some quick vocab words. We're going to move on to something obviously more complicated that actually is what we need to be taught in geometry. But I want to just go back through that very quickly.